Disregard as regard. Camera one. Action.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are back. It's been a while. This is Frankie Roberts and Malik Shabazz, my co-hosts. Disregard as regard. We took a little hiatus, but we're back, and we're ready to jump back in with our podcast. Malik?
What's up, everybody? Glad we're back. Been a while. Yeah, I'm happy we're back. Any
Feedback.
Any feedback?
Feedback from last time. So quite a bit of feedback, a lot of positive feedback. Not as much areas of improvement this time. So as we are getting better and better,
For sure.
with the podcast. But one of the feedbacks, Malik, I think you mentioned, is that we got a few of our friends and people that's watching the podcast that might have questioned whether we love white people like we love black people.
Yeah, we love everybody.
Yeah, let's make that clear.
Yeah, for sure. This is just a podcast, father and son. I have a biracial daughter. My partner is Italian. So, we love everybody. But we are showing the disadvantages of our people. And I think with today's video.
Yes, and let's use the word disparity.
Disparity. Break that down for me.
There's disparity with ethnic groups, black people, white people, Asian people.
Okay.
And certainly we're, one of the goals of the podcast was to kind of be or make us aware sometime of those intersections that if we were more aware of, we could show more love and kind of, if we show love, then we know what equality looks like.
Right. So we're basically showing the differences, and you go back to intersectionality. So we're at that intersection.
And today that we talk about the intersection of race as it relates to the criminal legal system. Some people say the criminal justice system, but I personally, since that's my day job, don't see a lot of justice. So we call it the criminal legal system. It's more of a legal system.
Yeah, one of my friends says it's, what is it? It's what you can prove now.
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, it's what you can prove at this point. But I get it. So tell them who are watching. Let's get into the video. And let's talk about, I call it, what I've heard you say, is mass incarceration.
Yes. So we're going to be talking about mass incarceration.
Cool.
One of the authors that I like, and when she wrote her book, she hit the circuit like a storm because the name of her book was Mass Incarceration, the New Jim Crow.
Okay.
And so when we think about Jim Crow, we think about 50s, the 60s, when, I wasn't born yet either. I was born in 1964.
Yeah, I was going to say, when I hear Jim Crow,
yeah, what is that, right?
Slavery. I'm just going to say slave times. That's my ignorance. I'm going to just say slavery.
And so we're going to play Michelle Alexander, and we're going to pause the video as we go and give some feedback or make clear what she's talking about as it relates to our experiences.
Okay.
And she has a canny way of being able to articulate how when black people were enslaved in America, and then when incarceration came on the scene, it took different forms at different times. So at the end of slavery, it was like another system replaced that.
I got you. I can understand that.
And then after that might have ended, then another system took place. But all of those systems targeted people of color.
There we go.
So here we go.
I would call that, here you go, blaming the system again. But let's do it. I'm ready.
The systematic mass incarceration of poor people of color is tantamount to a new caste system, one specifically designed to address the social, political, and economic challenges of our time. There was a time when I resisted comparisons between mass incarceration and Jim Crow and mass incarceration and slavery, believing that those kinds of comparisons were exaggerations, distortions, and were actually more likely to do harm than good to efforts to reform the criminal justice system and achieve.
So I wanted to pause this because to the point that we talked about, she, meaning Michelle Alexander, as you will hear, that is an accomplished attorney, that is also a professor, says that there was a time when she was like, man, that's garbage. The system and Jim Crow and mass incarceration, they had similar. She was like, oh man, hell no. So that's one thing I like about Michelle Alexander, because she was authentic to say, hey, I drunk the Kool-Aid too.
Right. Okay.
Greater racial equality in the United States. But after years of working on issues of racial profiling, representing victims of racial profiling, police brutality, investigating patterns of drug law enforcement in poor communities of color, and attempting to assist people to quote unquote re-enter into a society that never seemed to have much use for them in the first place, I had a series of experiences that began what I call my awakening. I began to awaken to a racial reality that seems so obvious to me now that what seems odd in retrospect is that I had been blind to it for so long. When I joined the ACLU, I was director of the Racial Justice Project for the ACLU in Northern California. I assumed that our criminal justice system had problems of racial bias, much in the same way all institutions in our society are infected to some degree or another with conscious or unconscious bias and stereotyping. And so I thought, well, I have a lot of experience in the employment discrimination field. I had been working at a firm suing Fortune 500 companies for employment discrimination. I thought, well, I'll just use the tools that I had developed in the employment discrimination context as a civil rights lawyer and apply them to criminal justice reform and work with others to root out racial bias wherever it might rear its ugly head in the criminal justice system. But by the time I left the ACLU, I come to suspect that I was wrong about the criminal justice system. It's not just another institution in our society infected with racial bias, but a different beast entirely. That mass incarceration of poor people of color now operates as a fully comprehensive and well-disguised system of racial control analogous to Jim Crow. I state my basic thesis in the introduction where I write, what has changed since the collapse of Jim Crow has less to do with the basic structure of our society than the language we use to justify it. In the era of colorblindness, it's no longer socially permissible to use race explicitly as a justification for discrimination, exclusion, and social contempt. So we don't. Rather than rely on race, we use our criminal justice system to label people of color criminals and then engage in all the practices we supposedly left behind. Today, it is perfectly legal to discriminate against criminals in nearly all the ways it was once legal to discriminate against African Americans. Once you're labeled a felon, the old forms of discrimination, employment discrimination, housing discrimination, denial of the right to vote, exclusion from jury service, are suddenly legal. As a criminal, you have scarcely more rights and arguably less respect than a black man living in Alabama at the height of Jim Crow. We have not ended racial caste in America. We have merely redesigned it. Now, here are a few of the facts that I uncovered in the course of researching the book.
So what do you think about that, Malik?
Wow. That was good. I like what she said. I agree. I agree.
So I was going to say, you know, a lot of young people your age, not intentionally, but it was, you all are so far removed than I am. I'm removed too, but not to the degree that you all are. But to know that as we were coming up out of slavery or doing slavery, we didn't have the right to vote. Obviously, we couldn't sit on a jury. Yeah, we was just pretty much, what they say, cattle. We were treated like animals. And it would say we was 3/5.
Wow.
And so what Michelle Alexander is saying, it is those same biases that people with a legal history now can't serve on a jury, can't vote, and in most cases can't even qualify to get a house. And I'm talking about to rent one, because you cannot rent to a person because they have a legal history if you don't want to, and that's, it's not a part of the Fair Housing Act. So yeah, it's completely legal for someone to do that.
I got you. I agree. Yeah, I can't, I don't have any words. I can't really, I don't know. But I will say, and I don't mean to do this, this is just a rebuttal, because this is another type of feedback I got from someone is, you know, I'm taking it too easy on you when you say blame the system. What about the ones who are actually doing the wrong thing and actually shouldn't be able to vote or shouldn't be able to do these things? Is that a part of it as well? I think I'm going.
No, that's a good, I mean, I think you speak for a lot of people when you say that. I think that when we go to prison, because I broke the law, I go to prison as punishment. Right. That is my punishment.
And she did say something about the lines of re-enter.
Yeah, so when I re-enter, I shouldn't be almost have to relive my worst mistake over and over and over again.
Okay. And then I think where people are losing us is because we're talking about our people, so we're getting incarcerated more than the average person. Is that kind of why we speak about mass incarceration? Because people get, locked up, people get arrested, but it seems as though people that look like me, people that look like you, they get incarcerated a lot more. Is that where she's going with this?
Well, those are the facts. So today in North Carolina, there's about 31,000 people incarcerated in North Carolina.
Okay.
All right. There are about 1.9 million in the country.
In America. Okay.
In America. And you already know, as we talked about earlier, we incarcerate more people than any other country in the world.
Say that one more time.
We incarcerate more people than any other people in the world, than any other country in the world. So we go to prison or incarcerated at 6 times the rate of white people.
That's insane, because I remember when we talked in our last episode about the school system, it was that we were suspended at 6 times.
There it is.
That's wow.
So that's how you look at it. And in North Carolina, black people only 22% of the population, but make up 61% of the prison population.
Wow. And I remember in our last episode, we were like, our kids don't even make up 50% of the school population, but we're getting suspended at like 60. Wow.
So those are just things that we have to confront the system about.
Okay. So when you say stuff, when you put it in that type of perspective, then I can say, okay, yes. But my rebuttal again, and this is where I get frustrated, is what is the plan? If we know that we're getting suspended or arrested at 6 times the rate, who do we lean on to do something different? Is it us? Do we need to hold class for, young Black African Americans to say, hey, this is how? Or is it the system who's been so wrong for so long that they need to have the class to say, hey, you guys have been treating us, like you said, since Jim Crow this way, but who holds them accountable? It's the law.
It's both and. We got to do both. We can't, it's counterproductive to blame the system. To me, it's more productive to hold the system accountable, but with those solutions. If I'm going to challenge a system, then I got to come with solutions and a can-do spirit. So I got to be willing to do something.
Gotcha.
That were part of my awakening. More African American adults are under correctional control today in prison or jail, on probation or parole, than were enslaved in 1850, a decade before the Civil War began. In 2004, more Black men were disenfranchised than in 1870. The year the 15th Amendment was ratified, prohibiting laws that explicitly deny the right to vote on the basis of race. Now, of course, during the Jim Crow era, poll taxes and literacy tests operated to keep Black folks from the polls. Well, today, felon disenfranchisement laws accomplish what poll taxes and literacy tests ultimately could not. It was recently reported that a Black child born today has less of a chance of being raised by both parents than a Black child born during slavery. This is due in large part to the mass incarceration of Black men. There was a...
Now, do you think that's true? I don't know. What?
I would have to fact check that one. I would say that is probably accurate. It's probably accurate because families, even though during slavery they used to use that as a way to control people who happen to be Black, was selling children or breaking families apart. But I would say during your grandmama era, who was my mama, I think that the statistics were during that time in the Black community, 72 to 76% of children were then being born in 2-parent homes.
Now, I do remember someone, I've heard, that was a way that Black families would get like assistance from the government, where they would say that the father isn't in the home, so they would, send him outside. That's
one of the reasons, I believe, and again, it's just my thought, that there was a time when it was almost a trend for, if I was looking for assistance, that I could get more support, if necessary, if I was single and the father wasn't around.
Yeah. And so that's the system's fault. Because, they're making it,
right,
to a point where a person has to lie and so
try to manipulate the system and that's a debate, so we'd have to talk about that.
I get it, but that when she said that, I'm like, that's wow.
Man, when you think about it though, Malik, there are, man, in your generation, there's very few individuals that grew up in a 2-parent home.
Yeah, I was gonna say, when I, growing up, you know, a lot of my friends would come to the house, you know, obviously. And it was about 4 years ago, one of my friends, you know, we were just sitting and hanging out and talking. He was like, you know, you are the reason we all came together to your house. Like, that's what it felt like to be a
family.
A family. He was like, and I could even tell times when your parents were upset with each other or arguing or not, you know, upset. And I was like, it was past me. Like,
Sure.
I didn't even, so I get what you're saying. Wow.
And that's why a lot of times when I'm talking again about my day job, when working with people, you know, man, it's an assumption that good morals, good character was built into the fabric of a person's upbringing. But most of the times it wasn't. And we take it for granted, you know, because you learn politics by being in a two-parent home. You learn influence by being in a two-parent home. One of your parents or the other could go to your events, go to the school. Yeah, man, it was when you got two, that's how it almost, it's a microcosm of government.
Break that down, a microcosm
Of government. Because I noticed that a lot of people who are are politicians, they legislate and kind of treat the country, or the way they legislate, based on being raised in a two-parent household, which most of the things that they are talking about was wrapped into the fabric of their upbringing. So that person really don't have the capacity to legislate things for single people, because they don't know what it's like not being in a two-parent home. And so they kind of dictate, legislate from that place of privilege. That's what I'm gonna call it, that place of privilege. That's why when we're even working with people with a legal history that's re-entering, you got to have people that are impacted by that at the table making the decisions, versus people at the table making the decision that don't know what it's like to be incarcerated.
Wow, I can see that. Maybe people in government need to know that. Because I don't know what they're in there doing, but wow. So wow, okay. I might need to meet this young lady.
Article about this that ran recently in The Economist magazine entitled How the Mass Incarceration of Black Men Harms Black Women. And the article explained that the majority of Black women in the United States are unmarried, including about 70% of Black professional women, and that this is due in large part to the mass incarceration of Black men, which takes them out of the dating pool at the years that they would be most likely to commit to a partner, to a family. But what's worse is that it renders them permanently unemployable in the legal job market, virtually guaranteeing that a large majority of them will cycle in and out of the criminal justice system for the rest of their lives. In this way, mass incarceration has decimated Black families to a degree comparable to slavery. In some major urban areas, more than half of working age African American men have criminal records and are thus subject to legalized discrimination for the rest of their lives. In fact, in Chicago, if you take into account prisoners, who of course are excluded from poverty statistics and unemployment data, thus greatly exaggerating the well-being of the African American community. In fact, standard Black unemployment rates, if you were to include prisoners, you would add about 15 to 25 percentage points to that figure. But it was reported in 2004 that if you take into account prisoners, nearly 80% of working age African American men in the Chicago area have criminal records and are thus subject to legalized discrimination for the rest of their lives. These men are part of a growing undercaste, not class, caste. A large group of people defined largely by race who are relegated to a second-class citizenship by law and custom for the rest of their lives. Now, I find when I tell people today that, I think that mass incarceration is, the new Jim Crow, or that mass incarceration functions a lot like slavery, people usually, react to me with a shocked disbelief. They say, well, how can you say that? Just look at Barack Obama, just look at Oprah Winfrey, look at Condoleezza Rice, look, and the list goes on of, high profile, visible African Americans who have made it, who have achieved great wealth, power, and fame is proof that nothing like a caste system could possibly exist in the United States today. But of course, the reality is that no caste system in the United States has ever governed all Black people. There have always been free Blacks and Black success stories, even during slavery and Jim Crow. During slavery, there were some Black slave owners, not many, but some. And during Jim Crow, there were some Black lawyers and some Black doctors, not many, but some. Now, the extraordinary nature of individual Black achievement in formerly white domains certainly suggests that the old Jim Crow system is dead. But it doesn't necessarily mean the end of racial caste. If history is any guide, it may have just taken a different form. I think any honest observer of American racial history has to acknowledge that the rules and reasons the legal system employs to enforce status relations of any kind, they evolve and they change as they're challenged. In the first chapter of the book, I describe the cyclical rebirths of racial caste in America. African Americans have repeatedly been controlled through institutions like slavery and Jim Crow, which appear to die, but then are reborn in new form, tailored to the needs of the time. Of course, following slavery, a new system was born to replace slavery, known as convict leasing. After the Civil War, Black men were arrested en masse, typically for minor crimes like loitering and vagrancy. It was our nation's first prison boom. They were arrested, sent to prison, and then leased to plantations. The idea, of course, was that they had to earn their freedom, but the catch was they could never pay back their plantation owner enough, to cover the costs of their clothing and shelter. And so they were effectively re-enslaved for the rest of their lives. Douglas Blackman has written an excellent book about this called Slavery by Another Name. Well, today, I think our criminal justice system has been...
Yeah, let's dive into that. I think that's important. I didn't know that. I really didn't know that. That's true.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. So, all right. So slavery ends. And let's make it relative to to today. And you, as now a nonprofit executive, as I've been one now for 22 years, your highest cost is going to be paying people.
Oh, for sure.
That's your highest cost.
Yeah, for sure.
In slavery, labor, that's how the slave owners got rich.
So off our hands.
Yeah, because the labor, even if I'm providing, I would, if I had, if anybody that runs a corporation, hey man, I can just provide you three meals and pay for your housing, yeah. And you work for me all day. Can't see morning, as my uncle said, it can't see night. So when slavery ends, oh man, what system do we now replace it with that we as a corporation can still make money? And they call it convict leasing.
So, forgive me, I don't know much. When they say that when she says they used to lock us up for loitering, what does she mean by that?
Yeah, just standing around.
So what?
Like like housing authority trespassing. People just or business, and they say you got a no trespassing sign. That's same as loitering.
Wow. Okay.
But again, I needed a system to create that system of incarceration, and then they brought those folks in and then lease them out to corporations. Like now, that's why some prisons have private. Something that they're private prisons.
So-
And even in the prisons that aren't private, in North Carolina, certain prisons are the ones that make the tags that go on our cars,
Correct.
so to state.
Right.
They make furniture, they make eyeglasses. Yeah, same construct.
I lost my question. So, oh man, I didn't know any of that. Wow. Yeah, that's mind blowing.
Yeah, I was going to say, so when we talk about solutions, I think sometimes if we make the people aware, the people that are victims and the people that are victimizing the victims more aware and conscious, or to go home and think about it, say, yeah, that wasn't right. And we did that a lot because of the color of their skin and because they were disenfranchised, or the Constitution at one point said we were 3/5 of the human being. So yeah, man, so when solutions, sometimes I just got to be made aware. And so if I'm the person that's doing something wrong to a lot of times take care of my family, but it's still wrong, maybe I might fight or work just a little harder because I'm now perpetuating another system, and I need to be able to sever those generational realities, because a lot of times it's a generational curse that, hey, my daddy went to prison, now I'm in prison, because I know at this point, I know fathers and sons that are in prison and grandsons.